Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the podcast. Today, we've got a really exciting topic to dive into, reading. Whether you're a bookworm or someone who struggles to find time to read, we're going to cover it all. I'm Sarah, and with me is Mark. How are you today, Mark?
Hey Sarah, I'm doing great. I'm really excited about today's topic because reading has played such an important role in my life, and I think it's something a lot of people can relate to.
Absolutely. Reading is one of those things that can shape you in so many ways. It opens up your mind to new perspectives, helps you learn, and sometimes even lets you escape reality for a little while. But let's start at the beginning, Mark. How did your relationship with reading start?
Well, I wasn't always a big reader as a kid. I actually struggled with it early on. I had a bit of dyslexia, so letters and words used to swim on the page for me. But then I had this one teacher in middle school who made a huge difference. She introduced me to books that were more interactive, choose-your-own-adventure type books. That's when I started seeing reading not as a task, but as an adventure. It was like I could create my own story. What about you, Sarah?
Oh, I was one of those kids who always had a book in my hand. My parents used to take me to the library every weekend. I loved getting lost in fantasy worlds. Harry Potter, the Chronicles of Narnia, you name it. I think for me, reading was this magical thing where anything was possible. I could be anyone and go anywhere.
It's funny how different our experiences were, but they both led us to the same place, a love of reading. And that's one of the beautiful things about it. There's no single way to be a reader. You don't have to be someone who reads 100 books a year to be considered a reader.
Exactly. And I think that's a misconception that a lot of people have, right? Some people feel like if they're not reading all the time, or if they don't read literary books, then it doesn't count. But the truth is, reading can look different for everyone. It can be fiction, nonfiction, graphic novels, or even listening to audiobooks. It's all about finding what speaks to you.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Lately, I've been reading more nonfiction, books about psychology, personal development, stuff like that. But I also love a good thriller when I need to unwind. The other day, I started listening to an audiobook while commuting, and it just felt like I was absorbing knowledge without even realizing it.
Audiobooks are such a game changer. I mean, there are so many ways to enjoy books now. I think that's especially important for people who struggle with reading, like those with dyslexia. Have you noticed how technology has made books more accessible?
Definitely. Text-to-speech tools, e-readers, and even podcasts are helping people engage with written content in ways that were unimaginable a few years ago. And speaking of podcasts, I think conversations like the one we're having right now are part of that accessibility. We're making ideas more digestible by breaking them down into discussions.
Yes, and sometimes hearing someone talk about a book or an idea can make it more interesting than reading it yourself. It's like a book club that you don't even have to leave your house for. Speaking of book clubs, have you ever been in one?
I have. I joined one last year, actually. It was a small group, and we read a mix of fiction and nonfiction. What I loved most about it was how it made me think more deeply about the books. When you're discussing a book with others, you often hear perspectives that you never would have considered on your own.
That's so true. I think one of the best parts of reading is when you get to talk about it with someone else. It's like unlocking new levels of understanding. I've had moments where I read a book, thought I understood it, and then after talking to a friend about it, realized there was so much more to it.
Exactly. And speaking of deeper understanding, I wanted to ask you, how do you think reading has impacted your thinking overall? Has it changed the way you approach life?
That's a great question. I think reading has made me more empathetic. When you read about different characters, cultures, or experiences, you start to see the world through other people's eyes. It helps you understand perspectives that you might never encounter in your everyday life. And it's also given me tools to process my own experiences. What about you?
For me, reading has taught me patience and focus. We live in a world where everything is fast-paced. Social media, constant notifications, it's all about quick consumption. But reading forces you to slow down and really engage with the material. It's made me a better listener and a more thoughtful person. It's like mental exercise.
I love that. It's like a workout for your brain, right? And it's true. Reading can help develop skills that go beyond just understanding words on a page. It sharpens your focus, boosts your memory, and even improves your writing.
100%. It's like the more you read, the more you build connections in your brain. I know that after I read a really thought-provoking book, I feel like my brain has expanded in some way. I'm seeing patterns in conversations or ideas I hadn't noticed before.
Totally. And for our listeners who might feel like they don't have time to read, I want to say that even just reading a little bit every day can make a difference. You don't have to sit down for hours at a time. Even just 10 minutes a day can help you build the habit.
Exactly. Start small, and you might be surprised how quickly it becomes a part of your routine. And like we said earlier, whether it's an audiobook during your commute, a short story before bed, or an article over lunch, reading can fit into your life in different ways.
You know, Mark, something I've been thinking about recently is the kind of books people gravitate toward. I've noticed that a lot of people, especially in the last few years, are really into self-development books. And while I get the appeal, I have to say I've always been more drawn to literature, classic novels, stories that dig deep into human nature. I just feel like fiction can give us insights into life that self-help books often don't.
I get what you mean. I've definitely gone through phases where I've been all about fiction. Some of those books shaped my imagination as a kid. But honestly, in the last few years, I've leaned more towards self-development books. They're practical. I like that they give me tools I can actually use in my day-to-day life. It's like a direct path to personal growth.
I get the practical side, but don't you feel like a lot of those books can be a bit formulaic? Like they follow a pattern, do this to succeed, think this way to be happy, and it can feel a little too prescriptive. Literature, on the other hand, doesn't try to give you answers. It poses questions, leaves things open-ended, and I think that's where real reflection happens.
I see where you're coming from, but I'd argue that self-development books aren't about giving you all the answers. They're more about offering frameworks. Take a book like Atomic Habits by James Clear. It's not telling you how to live your life, but it's showing you how small changes in your behavior can lead to big improvements. It's actionable.
Yeah, but I think that's where I struggle. Fiction, for me, doesn't need to be actionable. It's more about the experience of getting lost in a story, seeing the world through someone else's eyes, and coming away with a deeper understanding of life's complexities. It's not so much about fixing things as it is about feeling them, you know?
That's fair. I definitely think there's value in both approaches. I guess it just depends on what you're looking for at the moment. There are times when I want to dive into a novel and get lost in a fictional world, but other times I want something that feels more like a guide, a way to hack my life and make improvements. Do you think that fiction can offer the same kind of guidance?
Absolutely. I think literature can be just as transformative as any self-help book. Think about books like To Kill a Mockingbird or The Great Gatsby. They teach us about morality, ambition, the flaws in human nature, and they do it in a way that's subtle through storytelling. Sometimes the lessons you learn from a character's journey stay with you longer because they weren't spelled out for you. You have to discover them on your own.
That's a good point. In fact, I'd say some of the most impactful lessons I've learned didn't come from a self-help book, but from fiction. I remember reading 1984 by George Orwell, and it totally shifted my perspective on power and freedom. It was eye-opening in a way that made me question things in my own life.
Exactly. Fiction can do that in ways that nonfiction often can't. It leaves space for interpretation, which I think is crucial for personal growth. It's like a conversation between the reader and the book. You're not being told what to think. You're being invited to think for yourself.
I like that perspective, but I still think there's a place for both. Fiction challenges your imagination and helps you see the world differently, while self-development books give you a roadmap to change specific parts of your life. It's all about balance, I guess.
Yeah, I can get behind that. Balance is key. Maybe it's not about choosing one over the other, but knowing when you need one versus the other. Sometimes you need the roadmap, and sometimes you just need the journey.
Well said. So what's next on your reading list? More classic literature? Or are you finally going to dive into one of those self-help books I keep recommending?
Oh, I'm sticking with literature for now. But who knows? Maybe one of your recommendations will make it to my list eventually. What about you? Any fiction on the horizon?
Actually, yeah. I think I'll take your advice and dive into a novel. It's been a while since I got lost in a story. Maybe something with a bit of depth. Balance it out with my self-help reads.
That sounds like a plan. Maybe you'll finally see the light.
We'll see. But either way, I think we can both agree. Reading, whether it's literature or self-development, is always a win.
That's true. Here's to more reading, whatever form it takes.
Cheers to that.
Yeah, speaking of books, Mark, there's one we both read recently that I've been dying to talk about. Educated by Tara Westover. I have to say that memoir left a big impact on me. It's such a powerful story of resilience, identity, and the transformative power of education. What did you think?
Oh, I'm so glad you brought that up. Educated really struck a chord with me too. It's incredible how Westover grew up in such an isolated environment, without formal schooling, dealing with her family's survivalist mindset. And yet, she went on to earn a PhD from Cambridge. It's mind-blowing. Her journey of self-education, despite all those obstacles, is nothing short of inspiring.
I think what resonated with me the most was how she had to unlearn so much of what she was taught by her family. It wasn't just about getting a formal education. It was about reclaiming her mind and her sense of self. That really struck me, especially when she describes those moments of realizing that what she believed her whole life might not be true. That must have been so disconnecting.
Yeah, that part was intense. The way she describes those internal battles, questioning everything she thought was right, was so raw and honest. I think a lot of people can relate to that feeling on some level, even if they didn't grow up in a survivalist family. We all go through moments where we question the beliefs we've held for years, especially when we step outside of our comfort zones.
Exactly. And I loved how she showed that education isn't just about books or degrees. It's about expanding your worldview, challenging your own biases, and sometimes even separating yourself from the people you love. That part where she had to make the decision to distance herself from her family really hit me hard. It made me think about how much of our identity is tied to the people around us and how difficult it is to break away when those relationships are toxic.
Yeah, that was one of the most heartbreaking parts for me. You could really feel her pain in those moments. She loved her family, but she also knew that staying close to them meant losing herself. It's a tough choice. What I found most powerful, though, was how she eventually found a way to reconcile her past with her present. She didn't completely cut ties with her family, but she created boundaries that allowed her to protect her newfound sense of self.
I loved that part too. It was like she was able to rewrite her own story, not by forgetting where she came from, but by embracing her growth and understanding that she could honor both her past and her future. That's such an empowering message.
Definitely. And I think one of the biggest takeaways from the book is that education, whether it's formal or self-driven, gives you the tools to think critically, to understand the world around you in a deeper way, and ultimately to shape your own path. It's a reminder that no matter where you start in life, you have the power to change your circumstances.
Yes, and it's also a reminder of the privilege that comes with education. Not everyone has access to the same opportunities, but stories like Tara's show us that with determination and support, even the most challenging obstacles can be overcome. It's not easy and it's not always fair, but it is possible.
Well said, Sarah. And I think that's why her story resonates with so many people. It's not just about education in the traditional sense, but about self-empowerment, personal growth, and the courage to break away from the life that was handed to you in order to create the life you want.
Absolutely. It's a powerful testament to the human spirit and the lengths people will go to when they believe in something better for themselves. I think it's safe to say this book will stick with both of us for a long time.
For sure. If anyone listening hasn't read Educated yet, we highly recommend it. It's one of those books that really makes you reflect on your own life, your choices, and the power of education.
Definitely. So what's next for you on your reading list after Educated, Mark?
I think I might dive into some fiction, per your suggestion. Maybe a classic novel to balance out all the self-help I've been reading lately. What about you?
Nice. For me, I'm going back to my roots. Probably something like Pride and Prejudice. You can't go wrong with a little Austen.
A solid choice. Well, I think we've covered a lot today. It's been great talking books with you, as always, Sarah.
Same here, and thank you to our listeners for joining us. We hope you enjoyed the discussion and feel inspired to pick up a good book. Whether it's a novel, a memoir, or a self-help guide, there's always something to learn and enjoy.
Until next time, everyone, keep reading, keep growing, and we'll see you soon.